We turn now to First Minister's questions. Question number 1, Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what engagement she has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, members will be aware of the heartbreaking news today that 14-year-old Ailey MacLeod from Barra was amongst those killed in the Manchester Arena on Monday night. I know we will all want to send our love and thoughts to Ailey's mum and dad and to all of her family and friends at this dreadful time for them. Our thoughts are also with Ailey's friend Laura McIntyre, who remains in hospital. Later today, I'll have engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Ruth Davidson.
I'd like to associate myself with the words of the First Minister. The thoughts and prayers of these benches are with the families of those who lost loved ones on Monday, particularly today with the family of Ailey MacLeod, her friends and the whole Barra community. This is a tragedy that will be felt by everyone on the island, a close-knit community that today is grieving. Presiding Officer, it would not be right in my judgment to use today to indulge in the knockabout of an election campaign, but I also believe that we best show our contempt for the tactics of terror by going about our business of practising the very democratic values that bombers seek to destroy. So I'd like to use First Minister's questions today to do just that. So with the welfare of young people forefront in our minds, we spoke to the Scottish Youth Parliament yesterday to ask if there were any issues they wanted to raise. They are currently campaigning on the issue of young people's mental health and the need to ensure high-quality mental health service provision for all Scotland's young peoples. So can I ask the First Minister what action is her government taking to improve the mental health of young people across Scotland?
First Minister.
Well, can I thank Ruth Davidson for her question and also for the approach that she's taken. I think today, above all, it is our young people and their interest and well-being that is very much in all of our hearts. And the Scottish Youth Parliament has raised many issues over the years that have not just been of importance to young people in Scotland, but have then resulted in action by this Parliament, and I think that is to their credit. In terms of mental health, as members are aware, mental health for young people, for children and adolescents, and making sure that we can meet the demand on services, but also ensure a quality of services very much at the heart of our mental health strategy. In particular, amongst many other actions, we have given a commitment to a national review of personal and social education and the role of pastoral guidance in schools and school counselling services to make sure that every child has appropriate access to the right support in school. These actions, I think, have long been important, but given the events of the past few days, making sure that we have appropriate support for young people who, for a whole variety of reasons, experience stress and trauma and difficulty in their life is hugely important, and the Government is absolutely committed to making sure we do the right things in this regard.
Ruth Davidson.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Along with the concerns raised by the Scottish Youth Parliament, we also see this week the Scottish Association for Mental Health launching a campaign highlighting the mental health needs of young people. Its campaign, Going to Be, points out that 3 children in every classroom in Scotland will have experienced a mental health difficulty by the time they're 16 years old. It also points out that nearly 7,000 young people were turned away from child and adolescent mental health services last year, and warns that without help, their issues may worsen. So, does the First Minister share the concerns raised by SAMH, and can she assure them that the concerns raised in this campaign are being taken seriously and taken forward?
First Minister.
Yes, I do share the concerns of SAMH, but SAMH are also a key partner of the Scottish Government in terms of making sure we take the action to address some of those issues. As I've said many times in the Chamber before, and I know this is a point accepted and acknowledged right across the Chamber, we are seeing many more young people come forward for mental health services, and that is something we should encourage because it does demonstrate the reducing stigma associated with mental health, but it puts an obligation on the Government and our National Health Service and other agencies to make sure that we can meet that demand. I think there are 2 particular issues that I would want to briefly respond to in terms of Ruth Davidson's specific question. Firstly, around people who come forward for child and adolescent mental health referrals, and those referrals are rejected. As members will be aware, we have given a commitment in our mental health strategy to a review of rejected child and adolescent mental health service referrals, and then a commitment to use that review as a foundation for further improvements. It is important to point out, of course, that there will be a number of reasons why a referral might be rejected, and ultimately that is and always should be a clinical decision. there may, for example, be occasions when another intervention before CAMHS treatment is needed. However, we do want to make sure that our CAMHS services are working well and that they're joined up properly with other services so that young people get the care that they need. The second point is more general, and obviously I said in my first answer about the review that we are commissioning into personal and social education. But there's also an importance that I think we should all attach to mental health first aid. There is mental health first aid training to support staff and young people in educational establishments that has been funded by the Scottish Government and rolled out across Scotland by Education Scotland. And the aim of this is to train staff within secondary schools to increase their confidence in approaching pupils who think that they might be struggling with a mental health problem. And that training is very much about complementing other more formal services. So there's a whole range of actions that we are taking, and I hope the Chamber can unite behind this approach. We know there's work to do, but we're absolutely determined to get on and do it.
Ruth Davidson.
Again, let me thank the First Minister for her response. Of course, we often talk about money and resources when discussing these issues, but often it's about other factors too that are not within government control. For example, the fabulous work done by the Scouts, Guides, Boys Brigade and other youth organisations, all of which is shown to have a hugely beneficial impact on young people's mental health. Organisations which, in countless unseen ways, change the lives of young people for the better and which steer young people to better choices and to happier lives. As well as celebrating the work that they do, does the First Minister agree with me that we should do more to support youth organisations and aim to ensure that, as far as possible, every young person in Scotland has the chance to join one?
First Minister.
Yes, I do. I think we should pay tribute to the work of organisations like the Boys Brigade, the Scouts, the Brownies, the Girl Guides. In fact, I think we've had the Boys Brigade in this Parliament this week talking about the work they are doing to encourage young people to take part in sport. So they do fantastic work. I'm aware I'm sitting next to a former member of the Boys Brigade here. I'm sure there are many others in the Chamber as well, but they do fantastic work. And I think pointing to the work they do is important for a wider reason. And, you know, understandably this week we're talking about unbelievable horror and trauma that has been suffered by young people, principally the young people that were in Manchester Arena on Monday night. But as we've commented on in this chamber over the course of the last couple of days, children across our country who were nowhere near Manchester will be impacted by the scenes they've seen on their televisions. But we should never forget that youth is a time of great joy and should be a time of great happiness when young people get to explore. You know, I've read many things this week, so many beautiful and poignant things about the rite of passage for any young people of going to their first concert and the experience of that. So we must always remember that our principal obligation is to support in every way we can young people to be young people and to get the most out of life. And organisations like the one Ruth Davidson has mentioned today certainly play a very important part in making sure we do that.
Ruth Davidson.
Finally, Presiding Officer, the First Minister has touched on this earlier, but Sam H this week also raises a lack of counselling services in secondary schools and point out that children in Wales and Northern Ireland have guaranteed access to schools-based counselling. Notwithstanding the mental health strategy put in place by the Scottish Government, it says that children in Scotland are still missing out. Earlier this year, we published a mental health paper supporting the idea of school champions and counsellors to be appointed in schools, colleges and universities. In her first answer, the First Minister also referenced moves to improve counselling in schools. So can she give us an assurance today that this is something the Scottish Government will take forward in good time so that young people have the same counselling services available to them as elsewhere in the UK?
First Minister.
I think counselling in schools is hugely important. I think it's also important just in a wider sense to recognise that health and well-being is actually one of the core aspects of the curriculum for excellence. So it is embedded in the very curriculum of our schools, but it is important that we make sure that schools have access to the resources that allow them to support in a very practical and meaningful way the health and well-being of children and young people. So counselling is important. The review that I spoke about will look particularly at school counselling. I've also mentioned the role of mental health first aid training. I think it is important to say that a mental health linked person is available to every school. This is achieved in a variety of different ways using different models that meet local needs. So the linked worker might be a CAMHS clinician or from another specialty such as a primary care worker. However, that named link person will be able to contact specialist services for advice if they need to do so. But the review that I've spoken about, which is an important aspect of the mental health strategy, will allow us then to determine what further action we need to take to make sure schools have access to the right resources to give the best possible support to all young people.
Question number 2, Kezia Dugdale.
Do you ask the First Minister what engagement she has planned for the rest of the week?
First Minister.
Engagements to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Kezia Dugdale.
Presiding Officer, Barra is one of Scotland's most beautiful and peaceful places, and that peace has been shattered by the actions of Solomon Abedi. The family of Ailey MacLeod are grieving. The family of Laura McIntyre are just hoping and praying that their daughter will get better. A death like this shatters most communities, but it hits particularly hard in an island community like Barra. Can the First Minister tell us what extra support the Scottish Government can offer to the people of Barra at this difficult time?
First Minister.
I think Kezia Dugdale raises a really powerful point. The death of a young person in any circumstances, but particularly in tragic and horrific circumstances like the ones we've witnessed this week, is very difficult for any community anywhere to deal with. But Barra is a small island community. It's a very close-knit community. So the impact of the death of Ailey and the horrific injuries of Laura will be felt in this community in a way that is much, much more intense than will be the case in a bigger community, and we must be mindful of that. My own colleague, Angus Brendan McNeill, of course, is a resident of Barra himself, and I know from him just how that is being felt. In terms of the support being offered, Scottish Government officials have already engaged with the Council to ascertain the support being made available and to consider whether there are any ways in which we can support that. I understand that the Director of Education, who is himself an educational psychologist, is currently on Barra, and a further educational psychologist and NHS clinical psychologist are travelling there today. And between them, they are going to be focusing on the support that the families and those who were closest to these two girls will need. Of course, and I think people will understand and agree with this, their aim will be to keep things as normal as possible for the school that the girls attended, but to make sure that there is the support in place for young people who are going to need it. And the last point I would make here, and this is often a point that is relevant in any tragic incident like this, we all think of people in these circumstances in the immediate aftermath of incidents like this, because the media is full of the images, but it's often in the days, weeks and months after an event like this that the impact on those closest to people who have died will be felt. So I'm very conscious of the fact that the Government and working with the Council, who will be in the lead in this, need to make sure that that support is in place, not just today, next week or next month, but for as long as it is needed.
Kezia Dugdale.
I very much welcome that answer and thank the First Minister for it. After attacks like the one in Manchester, political leaders talk about how we can't let the terrorists change our way of life. And we can do that by carrying on with the business in this chamber and by holding the government to account as normal. And that's what I want to do now. Earlier this week, Target Ovarian Cancer published its Pathfinder report, the first of its kind in Scotland. And it found that 36% of GPs wrongly believe that there are no detectable symptoms of ovarian cancer. And that is costing lives. So can the First Minister tell us what steps she will take to improve the expertise and awareness of ovarian cancer among Scotland's GPs?
First Minister.
Well, we will pay very close attention to that report in the first instance. One of the things that is extremely important, particularly with cancer, and obviously our focus is on prevention and early detection as much as it is on treatment. But what is very important is to make sure that clinicians, particularly primary care clinicians, have the guidance and the information that they need to spot symptoms. And I know GPs and others working in primary care want to be in the best possible position to do that. So regularly, not simply with ovarian cancer, but with other conditions, there will be work to look at and review guidance that goes to clinicians. So I'll give an undertaking today that we will do that as far as the ovarian cancer report is concerned, because what we do know, and this runs very strongly through our Detect Cancer Early programme, is that the earlier cancer is detected, the better the outcomes for the patients who have it.
Kezia Dugdale.
thank you for that. And of course, it's not just GPs who lack awareness about the early signs of ovarian cancer. This report actually shows that 83% of women don't know the main signs or the main symptoms of ovarian cancer. And the First Minister just mentioned the Detect Cancer Early programme, which has been very successful of raising awareness about cancer of the breast, lung and bowel. But given the startling findings of this report and the prevalence of ovarian cancer, I wonder if the First Minister might think it's time to extend that Detect Cancer Early programme to cover ovarian cancer, which it currently doesn't.
First Minister.
We keep that under regular review. I mean, the decision around the Detect, I was Health Secretary when the Detect Cancer Early programme was first established, and there was a lot of very careful thought that went into the particular cancers to focus on in the first period of that campaign. And lung, breast and bowel cancer were selected because of the significant numbers of people who suffer from these cancers in Scotland. But regularly, groups representing patients with other cancers do make representation for inclusion in that programme, and we will always be happy to consider that. Given the Target Ovarian Cancer report that's been referred to today, we will certainly welcome the opportunity to discuss with Target Ovarian Cancer how we as government can support greater efforts to raise awareness amongst the public at large, but also in particular amongst people, clinicians working in primary care. And I'd be happy to make sure that the Health Secretary includes in that discussion possible future inclusion in the Detect Cancer Early programme.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister when the Cabinet will next meet.
First Minister.
On Tuesday.
Patrick Harvey.
May I add, Presiding Officer, my own condolences and those of my party to the family, friends and community of Aileen MacLeod, and our most sincere hopes for the recovery of a great many others who are still fighting for life perhaps, or recovering from serious injuries, including Aileen's friend Laura McIntyre. As the faces of those who've been lost or injured are seen, and as we learn the names and something of the life stories of those who've been affected, there will be tears shed in communities like Barra, right across the UK, and I think far around the world as well. Election campaigning is due to recommence later, and we all have a responsibility to do so in an appropriate tone, and in particular to reject the division that both terrorists and the far right in this country seek to create along lines of race and religion. Keeping people safe at home, though, must never prevent us from also valuing all life equally. Is the First Minister aware of the tragic deaths of at least 34 people, many of them children, toddlers and even babies, crossing the Mediterranean on Wednesday from Libya to Italy? Can I seek a continued commitment from the First Minister, and I hope from all political leaders, to resist the voices of hostility and xenophobia, to ensure that we look after those who need safe routes to this country and to others, and to be given safety and security as asylum seekers here? And would this be an appropriate time to press the UK for a reversal of its decision to scrap the Dubs Amendment protecting child refugees?
First Minister.
I am aware of the dreadful tragedy that Patrick Harvey refers to, and like anybody else who has read accounts of that, will have been just so distressed and upset to read of mainly toddlers being drowned and killed in this case. And I do think it is important for all of us, and I know this is the view we all take as human beings, is that the loss of a child's life is a tragedy, no matter where that child comes from, no matter the circumstances they've grown up in, and we should mourn and grieve any child's life, and where a child loses their life, whether in an attack like the one we saw in Manchester, or with their family crossing the Mediterranean, fleeing circumstances we can scarcely imagine, in the hope of a better life somewhere else. We should always dedicate ourselves to learning those lessons and trying to do everything we can to make the world a better place for our children to grow up in. The only person responsible for what happened in Manchester on Monday night was the man who did what he did and carried out that attack. But it is the case that we must, all of us, work to resolve the conflicts in the world that people like that individual completely without justification, but nevertheless they try to use as excuses for the heinous acts they carry out. There is a lot of injustice in our world right now, and we sometimes can feel very helpless in the face of that, but we all have a role to play in trying to address that injustice and making our world a better place. And one of the ways in which we can do that is to offer a hand of friendship to those who are fleeing conditions elsewhere that we can scarcely imagine. I'm very proud of the work that local authorities and other agencies across Scotland have done in welcoming Syrian refugees and making them feel at home here in Scotland. And today's not the day for party political statements to be made, but I do think there is more the UK can and should do in the years ahead. And honouring the Dubs Amendment would be one way of making sure that we are giving that helping hand to some of the most vulnerable children anywhere on our planet.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful for those words. All of our hearts are hurting for those whose names and faces we're learning, but it's important to remember the equal value of every life, including those whose faces we will probably never see and whose life stories we will probably never learn about. Can I also ask the First Minister about the decision by the UK Government, which in this case I support, to suspend the sharing of intelligence information with the United States following a series of leaks of particularly sensitive and potentially relevant to inquiries information to the media? It's been said that UK officials have expressed anger, disbelief and astonishment at the actions of the US intelligence services in leaking this information. Does the First Minister share that reaction? Does she agree with the decision of the UK Government to suspend the sharing of that information? And what are the implications for the security measures the Scottish Government and Police Scotland are responsible for if in future we're unable to trust the intelligence services of an ally?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, in terms of the first part of Patrick Harvey's question, as I said earlier on, every child is valued and we should mourn the death of every child. I will not be the only person in this chamber or across Scotland or the UK today who finds it difficult to look at the photograph of the wee 8-year-old girl that was killed in Manchester without feeling tearful. But many of the children who die in other circumstances, we will never see their photographs. But that does not mean that their lives are any less valuable or that we do not have a responsibility working with others to try to make things better for other children. In terms of the intelligence sharing, firstly, can I say the ability of countries to share intelligence and to share intelligence confidentially and securely is one of the things that helps keep us safe. And the importance of that and the importance of having trusted arrangements in place, such as through the Five Eyes system, it cannot be overestimated. So I do share the anger and disbelief of the UK Government that we have seen very sensitive details from this ongoing live investigation leaked to the media in America. That is completely unacceptable, and I think all of us should make clear that that is unacceptable and cannot be defended in any way, shape or form. So I think, although I know that they will have taken this decision with regret, I think the UK Government is right to hopefully, for a short period, stop sharing intelligence information like this with the American government. I know that they will want that to be for as short a period as possible. I know the Prime Minister has said that she'll be raising this issue with President Trump today. So I very much hope that the assurances will be given by the American government that allows a very speedy return to the sharing of intelligence that is such an important part of keeping not just the population in the UK safe, but populations across the world safe. But let us be in no doubt that what we have read and seen in American newspapers over the last couple of days is completely unacceptable and potentially compromises the investigation that is currently underway into the atrocity we saw here on Monday night.
And if we can keep the questions and answers relatively succinct, we've got a number of supplementaries. The first from Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In this sad week, people have many concerns, and of course safety and security are amongst them. May I ask the First Minister to confirm that the Chief Constable does have the proper resources to deal with the security situation here in Scotland as it currently stands?
First Minister.
I've had that assurance from the Chief Constable. We discussed this obviously yesterday in Parliament when I made a statement on the security situation. After that statement, I visited the Multi-Agency Coordination Centre in Govan Police Station and spoke again to the Chief Constable there. The Chief Constable has, as is his responsibility, reviewed the security arrangement in Scotland, given the increase in the threat level, and has made judgments about the level of policing, including armed policing, that is necessary. It is his judgment at this stage, although he will keep that under review, that the police have the resources within their own resources to provide that level of policing across Scotland, and therefore he does not require at this stage to call on military personnel to help police the streets or public places in Scotland. Although let me say publicly and record my gratitude to the military for their offers of support and for the support they are providing in other parts of the UK. I spoke to the Brigadier responsible in Scotland yesterday and recorded my gratitude for his offers of support. But the police here in Scotland have the resources from within Police Scotland to provide the appropriate level of security, and I think we should be grateful to them for that. But the Chief Constable has that operational responsibility to make those decisions, and he will keep that matter under review for as long as the heightened security situation exists.
Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This morning, Parliament's Culture Committee considered the role that Scotland's libraries, museums and galleries play in the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Would she understand that in this post-Manchester world, people of all ages keep asking why this atrocity happened? And therefore, would she undertake to coordinate that work of the national collections in the understanding and study of Islam, in the diversity of religious tolerance and understanding, and finally in the work that goes on across all our agencies to ensure that indeed happens?
I'm very happy to take that forward and ask Fiona Hislop to have a look at what we can do to support our national galleries, our libraries and others in making a contribution to the mutual understanding of different cultures and different faiths, because that is what is so important at the heart of this. So many conflicts and disputes across the world come from ignorance and misunderstanding. Some of it has to be said, deliberate misunderstanding and ignorance. But the more we can encourage people to learn and understand about different faiths and different cultures, the more chance we've got of ensuring that people, not just in this country, but across the world, can live together in harmony. So culture, books, art have a hugely important role to play in this. So I think it is a very good suggestion from Tavish Scott, and I'd be happy to ask Fiona Hislop to take it forward and to report back to him in due course.
And Bob Doris.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I met the head of the Student Association for Glasgow Kelvin College in Springburn recently. I understand that following strike action in colleges that terms may need to be extended to allow students to complete course credits. Can the Scottish Government work with colleges to ensure they are in a position to alleviate any additional student hardship caused by this, such as additional childcare or travel costs?
First Minister.
Shirley-Anne Somerville met with Colleges Scotland's Employers Association on Tuesday of this week to seek reassurance on the contingencies that colleges have in place to minimise any impact on students as a consequence of the recent strike action. A firm assurance was given that contingency measures are in place. However, I'm happy to ask Shirley-Anne Somerville to speak to Colleges Scotland to raise these specific issues. More generally, I'm very pleased that agreement was reached last Friday between unions and employers to enable further strike action to be called off.
Question number 4, Kate Forbes.
To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to attract foreign direct investment.
First Minister.
The 2017 Ernst & Young Attractiveness Survey on inward investment to the UK, published on Tuesday of this week, reported that with 122 projects successfully secured during 2016 in 3 Scottish cities, Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen in the top 10, Scotland continues to be the most attractive location for foreign direct investment outside of London in every one of the past 5 years. We continue to work with Scottish Development International to engage with potential investors across the globe to ensure that they are fully aware of the many strengths of the Scottish economy and the range of support available to help them grow their businesses here.
Kate Forbes.
I agree that the EY Scotland Attractiveness Survey is a very positive sign for the Scottish economy. Does the First Minister agree that a further positive sign is the number of high-value projects, particularly R&D projects that Scotland now attracts? And while they may not bring as many jobs in their first phase, they are the basis for a high-value, knowledge-based economy that will lead to more and better-paid jobs in the future.
First Minister.
Yes, I agree very much with that. The attraction of high-value jobs to Scotland is a very positive sign. The EY survey says, and I'm quoting it here, Scotland was a clear leader for R&D in the UK, attracting more projects than any other UK region in 2016. R&D projects attract high-skilled, high-value jobs, and our excellent performance in the face of what we see as reductions in R&D investment elsewhere, I think, is testament to the strength, amongst other things, of our academic excellence. But we mustn't be complacent, and we remain very focused on ensuring that Scotland continues to be seen as a highly attractive place to invest.
Jackie Bailey.
Whilst growth in foreign direct investment is absolutely to be welcomed, it was a 2.5% increase for last year compared to a 51% growth the previous year. So our growth was less than the UK as a whole, and the total number of jobs secured has fallen by almost 50%. The EY survey also said that Scotland's perceived attractiveness to investors has decreased for a number of reasons that I won't rehearse. So can the First Minister offer an explanation as to why there is this difference in FDI growth and what action she is taking to close that gap?
First Minister.
I think it's very difficult for anybody to fairly read the EY report from Tuesday and come to the conclusion that it's anything other than positive for Scotland. I mean, if we look, for example, at the comparison with last year, 2015, which is the previous year report was based on, was our highest percentage share of UK projects recorded in the past 10 years. So it was a particularly strong year. So the improvement this year on last year was always likely to be slightly less than that. But the 2016 result is still excellent. 10.7% of all projects coming to Scotland still places Scotland significantly above our population share in what is an extremely competitive inward investment environment. And I think that is something that we shouldn't be complacent about, but we should all absolutely celebrate. In terms of jobs, and this actually goes back to the question Kate Forbes has just asked me. Kate Forbes, I think, absolutely put her finger on this. A number of the projects, of course, reported through the EY study didn't have figures for job numbers, so that obviously reduces the number because we don't know for some of the projects how many jobs are there. But one of the issues with numbers of jobs here is that so many of the projects that we attracted last year were high-value projects, particularly in R&D, and as most people know from their own experience, these kind of projects do not necessarily bring the large numbers of jobs that others do. But what they do bring is huge value to the Scottish economy. And the future success of our economy is based on attracting high-skilled roles in areas like R&D and software, delivering that higher value. So actually, the success in R&D should be something that we don't see as a negative because it perhaps brings fewer jobs. We should see it as a positive because of the added value that it adds to our economy over the longer term.
Mike Rumbles.
While foreign direct investment is absolutely essential to Scotland, before any Scottish Government money is invested in these companies from abroad or based abroad, will the Scottish Government be carrying out any checks to ensure two things? One, that those companies pay their proper taxes in the UK, and as importantly, that they have a level of pay for their workforce which is legal and appropriate?
First Minister.
Well, Scottish Enterprise carries out robust due diligence on companies before they invest and has a careful assessment of the companies that they invest in, not least so that we can ensure that we're getting greatest value for taxpayers' money. In terms of the two particular points raised by Mike Rumbles, the position of the Scottish Government could not be clearer. It is absolutely the responsibility of all companies to pay the tax that they are due to pay, and I believe that we should have, and this is not a responsibility for the Scottish Government, it's not within our powers, but there should be much more robust rules and regulations around tax avoidance by companies in place. And in terms of the living wage, we are absolutely crystal clear about the importance we attach to payment of the living wage. And we are in the situation now where Scotland has a higher percentage of people paid the real living wage than any other nation in the UK, but we still have work to do. So we will continue to use all of the levers at our disposal to make sure that we encourage companies to pay the living wage or set out plans by which they can move towards paying the living wage.
Question number 5, Adam Tompkins.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government will provide details of the meeting it held with business leaders on the 21st of March.
First Minister.
Ministers regularly engage with the business community and publish details of these meetings proactively on the Scottish Government website. On the 21st of March, I, with the Deputy First Minister and the Economy Secretary and the Finance Secretary, met with 13 key business leaders at Butte House to continue our engagement with industry on Scottish Government activity and allow them the opportunity to raise any issues with us in return.
Adam Tompkins.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, and I'm very pleased, of course, that the Scottish Government spends a proportion of its time speaking with Scotland's business leaders. We can all learn from Scotland's businesses, large and small, about how we can grow and stimulate the Scottish economy. Given that young people are rightly and understandably a theme of today's First Minister's questions, let me ask this. What advice have Scotland's business leaders given the First Minister on how Scotland's economy can be stimulated for our young people entering the jobs market for the first time? And how is the Scottish Government acting on and taking forward this advice?
First Minister.
Well, there's a range of different ways in which we are working to make sure that our economy offers the opportunities that our young people need and want. The work that many of our universities and colleges do with business to make sure that they are providing the courses and the opportunities that employers need to grow their businesses is part of that. The work we're doing to encourage high-value investment into Scotland is another part of that. Developing the young workforce, one of the business leaders that was engaged in discussion with us on the date that I'm talking about was Serene Wood. Serene Wood, of course, led the work for the Scottish Government on developing the young workforce to make much more close and productive those links between our schools and our academic institutions and the world of work. And that developing the young workforce work is now being taken forward across Scotland, where Chambers of Commerce, for example, have a leading role to play in that. So while our economic strategy and our economic initiatives have a range of purposes in terms of growing the economy, all of it should be furthering the opportunities that our young people have to succeed and to prosper.
Question number 6, Anas Sarwar.
To ask the First Minister, in light of her expressing the view that the NHS pay cap is unsustainable, whether the Scottish Government will provide details of the submission it made to the pay review body.
First Minister.
In the last pay review, the submission that the Scottish Government sent included a commitment to paying the real living wage, guaranteeing a minimum increase of £400 for staff earning £22,000 or less, continuing our policy of no compulsory redundancies. Of course, all three of those policies are different to the situation elsewhere in the UK, and lastly, a 1% pay increase for staff earning over £22,000, which I know is similar to the position in Wales. Now, that was our last submission. I've made it clear that as we have now entered a period where inflation is rising, the pay restraint that we've seen in recent times is unsustainable. And that's why in advance of our next submission, we've already asked staff representatives, including unions, to work with us to gather evidence to submit to the NHS peer review body.
Anas Sarwar.
The First Minister for that answer. She'll be aware that our NHS staff have endured 7 years of pay restraint, and for some nurses this has meant a 14% real terms cut worth £3,400. As she has just said, her own submission to the peer review body was to keep the 1% pay cap. Does the First Minister accept that our fantastic NHS staff deserve better pay, and will she commit to scrapping the pay cap?
First Minister.
Well, as I said before, we have had pay restraint for the last number of years, and I know how difficult that has been for staff. The purpose of that, of course, at a time when our budgets have been getting reduced year on year, has been to protect jobs in our public services and our NHS and our wider public service. And the Scottish Government has taken a range of actions to try to give targeted support, particularly to the lowest paid. And the initiatives I outlined, the real living wage, the guaranteed increase for low-paid staff, the continuation of no compulsory redundancies, these are all policies that are not in place elsewhere in the UK. And I think that is an indication of how seriously we take fair treatment for those who work in our NHS. In terms of the future, I've made clear that when inflation is rising, pay restraint of that nature cannot be sustainable. So we in the NHS have given that commitment to getting a submission with staff representatives that takes account of inflation and moving forward where we can secure fair outcomes for staff in the NHS and the wider public service that take account of affordability but also take account of the cost of living and the pressures that people live with on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, and that concludes First Minister's questions. We'll now move on to members' business in the name of James Dornan on the 50th anniversary of the Lisbon Lions. We'll just take a few moments for members to change seats.